So what I want to do is to try and start with an overview of where the attacks are coming from in the sense of the generality of attacks, not the specificity of it. Then to talk about how to evaluate the risk dynamics of this, because I think risk is an important part of feeding in towards your defense strategy, because you've got to make decisions, you've got to make playoffs in relation to how to evaluate what best to do for your business, and then ultimately to put in play the business, because it was touched upon this morning that the role of the business is to be your supporter, but they can also be your greatest critic, and in that sense to see where you can develop your own sense of modelling from. And the other dynamic which is at play here is, in my opinion, there has never been so much data stored ever. There's a massive amount of data stored, and again, the economics is driving towards consolidation of data and databases. So again, you're putting huge honeypots in front of people who have access, which will eventually become your weak point as people start to hack into this and realize the value that comes from data. But in the cyber world, we know that the number and the variety and the type of threats which are out there are many and varied. And the first point of reference I believe you've got to make is an understanding of the sort of threats that have the ability to impact your business model, because that's your understanding of how what's out there can come towards you. And when defenses fail, the business ultimately ends up paying the price. But that price is a different price than simply the money, because losses, when you analyze them, if you take first off the money losses, there are maybe 6 different types of money losses that I have indicated there. The first is the direct loss. We're actually out the money. We've lost some money somewhere. It's gone missing, and that's just pure tangible loss. The second is the indirect, where the consequence of your processing or not processing meant that somewhere in the chain of process, somebody else lost out, and you ultimately have to recompense them for your failure in that situation. Third tends to be consequential loss. Let's say, for example, that I'm providing stock quotes for an online trading site, and I provide the wrong quotes. The customer who makes the decision based upon my false information and suffers the loss will sue me, and consequentially I will be bound to pay on that loss because I have been the originator of the fault. Next, restitution. Restitution, I find, is one of these things that is a simple word, but it can be an incredibly complex and expensive thing to do. I quote you the example of the Nationwide Building Society in the United Kingdom, who lost a laptop. It was stolen, one laptop stolen. Consequent of that, the regulator said, was it encrypted? No, it wasn't. Okay, well then, do you know which customer information was on that laptop? No, we don't. Well, that means then you're going to have to write to each of your customers, all 11 million of them. Now, writing to 11 million customers in itself is a costly exercise. The steward's inquiry that goes on after it, with consultants and all sorts, is another costly exercise. Putting people back in the position they should have been in the first place is costly exercises. Most of your businesses are like Formula One racing cars. They are not designed to go backwards. They're designed to go forward remorselessly and efficiently, but they're very hard to reverse up. It's very difficult to find that point when the thing went wrong, particularly if it's something like data corruption. When does data corruption start? Can you actually find that moment? Very difficult in those situations. The repair bill, the bill to actually fix the fault, well, ultimately you'll have to bear that. It may be damage to your servers, your networks, who knows what. But again, there's an expense in that. And then the ability to ensure that you can never again repeat this mistake. We saw figures earlier for Sony in relation to how much money they had to spend, or will be spending on their accounts. The figures for TK Maxx when they lost their 45 million records. They provisioned $120 million US as a consequence of that loss. So again, what I'm saying is that the actual implication between the spending and the saving is very disproportionate, because when you have to start rectification, it becomes a very expensive business. Because as a consequence of the crisis that there has been, there is a much greater focus now upon the veracity of financial reporting, that is to say your annual accounts, etc. But running alongside that now has been the emergence of risk committees. That is to say, bodies of people working towards the board who are deciding upon how much risk appetite your business is prepared to run and they're prepared to underwrite. So taking that a step further, there's also pressure now to actually publish the risk appetite of your business. So you actually make risk statements public, which will ultimately become a challenge in relation to how far you can honour the promise of those risk statements in the reality of what follows. Because if you promise up front that you will contain your maximum loss to, let's say, 10 million, and you report the following year that you're at 50 million, then somebody's going to be asking the hard questions. Not so long ago, someone came to me with, I think it was 32 separate ideas as to what we needed to do to increase security. My only question to them was, which of those can we not afford to do? Because in a sense, if you know that there's a solution, are you obligated to effect a solution, or are you obligated to pick and choose in a list and simply say, okay, well, we run a risk, we'll take a chance. There's nothing wrong with running risk. Let me be clear on that. There's nothing wrong with running risk. What I'm saying is, if you want to run risks, you need to be explicit in making the business aware of those, because when it goes wrong, they will come back to you and they will say, you didn't tell us, or we weren't aware of the fact that the internet could go down for 12 hours, because the implication of that to the business is quite substantial. To me, the ultimate nightmare for any business is those 4 words. And don't think it doesn't happen. I mean, I was sitting a couple of weekends ago at home and I popped onto my email provider and I got these 4 words. And those 4 words sat and looked at me for the rest of that day. For the whole of Saturday, I was sitting thinking, why am I working with these people? What rubbish is this? What fool was I to think I should trust them? And suddenly the nightmare is there. This is real time happening. And this is operational risk management writ large. This is when the cameras turn up and say, we want to speak to the person in charge. And of course that's your managing director or your head of department or whoever it happens to be, but they will immediately turn to whoever you are and say, hey, what's going on here? Help me. Suddenly I'm aware of an issue I wasn't aware of before. And the tangibility of this keeps increasing. I mean, I quote, for example, Ryanair, which historically used to be a booking company. You would surf on, you would book your flight, and in 6 weeks or a month's time, whatever it was, you'd fly with them. Today, that company uses the World Wide Web presence to print your boarding passes for you. So it becomes an operational tool. Therefore, what is the tolerance for downtime that you can have in a model that is so totally dependent upon being 24/7 non-stop active? And this, in a sense, is the challenge. And when the business asks the question, they want to know who's responsible for any incident that turns up. Because the point I wanted to make on this is responsibilities for cyber tend to be very disparate and varied. You know, it can be part of the fraud department, part of the IT department, access controls, maybe somewhere else, information security, CISOs. There is an ability and a capacity to spread the responsibility for this broadly and widely. Yet when we look at the dynamics that are at play, what people are looking for generally is for a well-developed business model that has resilience built in, that has a capacity to withstand shock, that is on a regular basis proven and tested through rehearsal exercises. And this is to the degree to which I have the concern that too much of the responsibility for cyber is dissipated and therefore not concentrated sufficiently. And the other critical point here is data. It's not just about operations. Data today is very much where the battlefront is at. The ability to steal data, the ability to corrupt data, the ability to use data is fundamental to where the whole world has moved to, and a lot of what is being fought over out there is the war over data. A lot of the challenges from the operational world come in when business falls over and the call centers get flooded and suddenly you're into having to manufacture a solution on the spot, on the fly, which is never the way to do it. The issue is to practice it. And that's why the business needs to show interest in downtime. Ultimately, cyber has many unique features to it. I think the greatest of those is the fact that, if you go back to my tsunami example, Mother Nature does not advertise in advance that there's going to be an earthquake. It simply happens. It's the art of the unexpected, and it's managing the unexpected. Regular proving and testing and setting objectives for those proofs and tests is vital. You have to know what you're trying to prove and test against. It's not just enough to be doing it as a mechanical exercise. You have to actually be able to do it from a business perspective of how much pain can you withstand, for how long can you withstand it, and who will help to dig you out. Will you have to turn to someone externally? Will you have to work with competitors even? It's been known, and it is known, that in many cases if an institution was in trouble, other institutions would have to draw alongside and help, particularly if it was at a national level. And we've seen the implication of Stuxnet in relation to physical infrastructure and what could happen in that world. So develop your defences and then review regularly, repetitively and rigorously. People don't like those 3 R's. But I think they are an imperative set of 3 R's. And finally then, I believe there is the importance of getting independent authentication of what you're doing, because the inevitability is if you do it internally without external provocation, you're going to forgive your colleagues their excuses. You're going to give them the out when they should be held to account. Often there's not enough ability to hold to account because you know that you've got to behold to them tomorrow or the day after for something else. You've got to be rigorous in proving and testing, and you've got to ensure that there is that independent authentication. Without that, I think you're probably not setting the bar high enough, and you may not get enough feedback of what other people are seeing still in the outside world that's going to help you protect and defend your business model.